Hello and welcome to the Value Summit Part 2. This summit today is entitled Maintaining Value in the Echo Lab, and we have several great presentations for you about various aspects of running your Echo Lab and optimizing things. My co-chair today is Carol Mitchell from the University of Wisconsin, and I'm Peter Rocco, also from the University of Wisconsin. And so I'm going to turn it over to Carol now to introduce our first lecture. Carol?
Thank you, Dr. Rocco. And our first speaker today is going to be Dr. Merri Bremer. She is the Echocardiography Laboratory Education and Quality Coordinator and the Advanced Cardiovascular Sonography Program Director at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. And she will be speaking to us today on the topic of ImageGuideEcho Registry, Quality, and Role in the Echo Lab Accreditation. Take it away, Merri.
Hello. For the next 10 minutes or so, we are going to cover the ImageGuideEcho Registry and its role in quality improvement and Echo Lab accreditation. My disclosure is that I'm chair-elect of the IAC Board of Directors. However, I am also an ASE member and volunteer, and during this talk I will very much be wearing both my IAC and ASE hats. So let's talk first about what the registry is. It's the first cardiovascular registry of its kind, and it focuses on non-invasive cardiac imaging studies. It is managed by the American Society of Echocardiography, and really it exists to assess specific quality metrics and patient outcomes through analysis of echo-specific registry data. Its primary purpose is quality improvement, and you can see that illustrated here on this graphic. Number 1 is quality improvement. So how does this work? Well, there's a fully integrated online platform that collects echo data to measure quality, safety, and efficiency. Data capture is standardized, and this allows benchmarking of performance for individual labs or entire practices or health systems against national data. People want to know, how does it help quality improvement? Well, for starters, it identifies quality gaps. It's also able to compare individual physician performance to institutional and national aggregates. It allows comparison of lab quality against echo-specific peer-established benchmarks, think ASE guidelines and best practices. It also provides automated checks, balances, and error feedback for the individual data fields. In terms of benefits for providers, anyone participating in the registry has access to dashboards and standardized performance data. It's also helpful in demonstrating appropriate use of cardiac imaging tests to payers. And the new user-friendly platform, ARMIS, has an option of automatic data submission and inclusion of images. I think the biggest thing is that it also satisfies MIPS requirements through reports on performance measures and improvement activities. And this slide will illustrate the QCDR performance measures for 2021 that are met by the ImageGuideEcho registry. Down on the bottom, you will also see nuclear performance measures. ImageGuide also has a nuclear component, but today I'll just be talking about the echo side of things. Something to remember, though, if you have a multimodality lab and are interested in participating in both. So ASE has chosen a phased data implementation model. Phase 1 is already completed, and data that is input includes a site profile, patient demographics, and transthoracic echocardiography data, as well as study conclusions. Phase 2 is currently in progress. Right now, IAC and ASE are working together to determine metrics for stress echo and transesophageal echo, which allows for expansion of the data set. Phase 3 will include pediatric echo, which will provide a very robust data set. And in future phases, looking at linking to outcomes data and additional technology expansion. In terms of site-specific data that may be included, this is not an exhaustive list, but it includes things like staffing resources, practice characteristics, on-site diagnostic and revascularization capabilities, accreditation information, office location information, and equipment and software information. For demographic data, it's patient baseline characteristics like height, weight, and blood pressure, primary and secondary indications for the exam, the type of study performed, and whether things like contrast or agitated saline or strain were done. In terms of the transthoracic echo data, it includes things like which views were obtained, and then LV dimensions and volumes, EF, LV regional function, hypertrophy, atrial size, aortic root dimension, comments on the valves in terms of structure and function, prosthetic valves, and quantitative measurements, as well as the presence of pericardial effusion and characteristics. And for those of you who do work in accredited labs, you'll see that a lot of these things are also required for accreditation. So I think this is the first place that you can see that IAC and ASE have been working together to try and make things consistent. In terms of study conclusion data, that includes things like study quality and report turnaround time as metrics. Now, I am happy to say that I saw this on Twitter. I'm recording this in early May, so it was just a few days ago, on April 30th. The goal this year for the ImageGuideEcho registry was to reach 10,000 echoes. However, at the end of April, there were already over 35,000 echoes submitted, which is absolutely fantastic. And having a nice data set like that will help in terms of quality metrics and patient outcome analysis. So this is absolutely fantastic. I'd like to talk now for just a few minutes about the collaboration between IAC and ASE. I think it's important to recognize that the IAC and ASE missions are both aligned in the quality space. And you can see the mission statements down here. So here's the ASE mission: to advance cardiovascular ultrasound and improve lives through excellence in education, research, innovation, advocacy, and service to the public and profession. IAC's mission is a little simpler, but just as important: improving healthcare through accreditation. And what's nice about this collaboration is that both organizations' strengths have been enhanced in order to meet quality initiatives. Now again, just to remind you, the ImageGuideEcho registry is actually managed by ASE. This is an independent process from the accreditation process that IAC does, but it is designed with input from IAC, and many data elements match those used by IAC, and this is definitely on purpose. So one thing that is already in place is in terms of QI measures. For those of you who are in accredited labs, you're familiar with the 4 QI measures: appropriate use criteria, technical quality, interpretive quality, and report completeness and timeliness. And currently, if you are a participant in the ImageGuideEcho registry, there is a report completeness and timeliness component, and that data can be extracted from ImageGuideEcho and then uploaded for IAC accreditation. It meets that standard. In terms of collaborative work that we're doing currently, we're working on stress echo and TEE data alignment and brainstorming ways to recognize higher level quality echo labs. There's an initiative on the IAC side called the Recognition of Continuous Quality Improvement Award. And this has 3 components to it: an accredited lab through IAC, participation in the Echo Image Guide registry, and use of the IAC QI tool. So stay tuned for more news regarding. Possibilities really are endless. Looking at what other metrics or reports from ImageGuideEcho might fulfill the QI requirements for IAC, I wonder if there's a role for the IAC QI tool to document process improvement for gaps that have been identified with the registry. With the new platform, images can be uploaded. So is there a way where images can be uploaded to the registry and then used in the IAC accreditation review process so you don't need to submit to 2 different places? Possibility. That's a possibility. And then also, IAC is working on a more continuous accreditation model. I think many of us in accredited labs really have come to hate the once every 3 years mad dash to get things ready for accreditation. So how can the ImageGuide registry and IAC work together to build a more continuous accreditation model so you don't have that mad dash every 3 years? Really, all of us would like to hear your ideas. So if you've got a good idea or you have a question, please contact either IAC or ASE. I think the key collaborative goal, and I cannot emphasize this enough, is seamless integration of the registry and IAC to decrease the burden of both quality improvement efforts and lab accreditation. That's where we want to be. And I think with the pathway that's been defined, we are going to get there. So I would like to thank you for your attention. I hope if you are not already participating in the registry that you do consider it, and please let me know what questions I can answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Merri. That was a great summary of the registry. Now we want to move on to our second speaker. He is Dr. Richard Wright from the Pacific Heart Institute in Santa Monica. Dr. Wright earned his medical degree from Harvard and did his residency and fellowship at the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. He served as a director of the Heart Institute at St. John's Health Center in Santa Monica and is on the clinical faculty at UCLA. Importantly, though, he's the co-director of the California Medicare Contractor Advisory Committee, the chair of the American College of Cardiology National Carrier Advisory Committee, and also a cardiology advisor to the Medicare Relative Value Update Committee. There's probably no cardiologist in the country that knows things about CPT coding and the RUC more than Dr. Wright. So we look forward to this presentation to help untangle some of these difficult to understand concepts. Dr. Wright.
I'm Dr. Richard Wright from Santa Monica, California, and I'm here to talk about CPT and RUC and how it impacts echocardiography. This I know is an arcane topic. Many of you don't know much about it, but hopefully in the next few minutes I'll be able to educate you about this. I have no disclosures regarding this particular talk. Healthcare costs drive this entire field, and here's a quote from a friend of mine. I don't believe there's any problem in this country, no matter how tough it is, that Americans, when they roll up their sleeves, can't completely ignore. And the point of this is that this is a problem that's been brewing for decades. Here you can see the Medicare costs rising. These are inflation-adjusted dollars and billions of dollars from just after the inception of Medicare until 2010. And this type of rise really forces the federal government to try to reduce costs. Now, if you look at costs, there's a huge variation across the United States. Here's a sample of MRI of the knee. In pink is hospital costs. In green is outpatient imaging center costs. And you can see not only an enormous variation in different parts of the country that don't correlate with local costs, but also an enormous difference between in-facility hospital costs and outpatient center costs. And this is true of echocardiography as well. And these types of things just drive the payers crazy. The second thing that we need to deal with when we talk about appropriately pricing echo services is the disparity in Medicare cost per beneficiary, and this holds true in the commercial world as well. And what you see is an enormous difference in terms of Medicare beneficiaries age adjusted. If you adjust for age, sex, ethnicity, and prices, you can see that Florida, for example, and parts of the South spend twice as much per Medicare beneficiary as, for example, the state of Washington or the state of Minnesota. And finally, when you ask physicians, why is there this variation? They will always say things like this: my costs are higher, my patients are different, they're sicker, they're poor. But I can tell you, when you go to CMS in Baltimore or you go to Congress in Washington, nobody believes this, not a single person. That means that therefore we have a fiscal challenge. We have these escalating costs. Most of the payers believe that this is poor healthcare value, and we therefore need to reduce costs. How do we do that? Well, unfortunately, physicians have had targets placed on our back, and we are called the people to blame for this particular problem. Indeed, if you look at the total cost of Medicare in its first year, $3 billion in 1967. In 2018 and 19, you can see that the cost just for Medicare Part B fee-for-service, this excludes Medicare A, which is hospital. This is just physician fees outside of Medicare Advantage Part C. Now, last year, because of COVID, the cost fell $11 billion. And that's still, there's a 10% reduction even today in total Medicare expenses. So COVID has given us a little reprieve, if you will. But these cost rises every single year have led to Medicare coming down with a hammer on us. And that's what led to this, the signing of Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act. Notice it wasn't called the Quality Care Act, it was called the Affordable Care Act for a reason. They hoped to be able to reduce costs, overall cost to the federal government, by payment reforms. And you're all aware of these, accountable care organizations, demonstration projects, pilot projects, bundled payments, and value-based purchasing, which you've heard. But unfortunately, none of these delivered the cost savings. And that led Medicare to use a bigger hammer, which is to use Medicare fee reductions as one way to lower costs.
These Medicare fees are published every year in the Medicare fee schedule. And if you want boring reading, read all 1,200 pages of this document. In July, there's a proposal. It's finalized in November. So coming soon, we'll have the proposals for 2022. There's a public comment period, but these codes represent the entire universe of things you can bill Medicare for. And of course, these codes are followed by the private payers as well. Each code is assigned a relative value unit, and that unit is then multiplied by the so-called conversion factor. This year, that's $34.89 plus change. So that if something is 1 RVU, then you will be paid by Medicare $34.89 for that particular service. Now, most of these more than 10,000 codes are procedure codes, but of course, all the echo codes are included in here. These codes add up quickly. You can see in yellow at the bottom of the slide that over $6 billion is spent on Medicare Part B fee-for-service to cardiology, and over $1 billion of that is just echocardiograms. And to put that in perspective, echoes, EKGs, and monitors cost as much to Medicare as all of the oncology world, all emergency room visits, or all cardiac surgery. Now, we had been doing well in recent years. This is the growth per beneficiary in inflation-adjusted dollars. And you can see that about 15 years ago, there was an unsustainable growth, and then that was able to be ratcheted down, but it has risen again. It's rising at about 1 to 1.5% greater than inflation. And that will mean there will be increasing pressures on Medicare to lower reimbursements for echo. Echo has grown a little bit. There were years that it didn't grow, but in 2019, the last year that we used, because 2020, because of COVID, is not considered a valid reflection. Echo codes grew by 4% in terms of total dollar expenses for Medicare fee for service. And fortunately, that's not as bad as some of these lower things. Extended EKG monitors up 52%. You can be certain that means that those will be reduced in their values. Now, who determines these values? The RUC has been charged by Medicare to be the advisory committee. This is a volunteer committee made up of practicing physicians who are convened by the AMA. We meet 3 times a year and we make recommendations about service payment. That could be an E&M service, it could be an echo service, or it could be an appendectomy. 90% of the time, our recommended values are accepted by CMS. This is what the RUC normally looks like. Now, obviously, because of COVID, we've been doing this virtually. But typically, 350 people meet in a room, and in the center of the room is basically the jury. I will sit at the table and argue on your behalf in terms of what echo payments should be before the jury then votes. This jury, or the RUC, are representatives from these specialties, and we do have a cardiology representative on this particular body. There's also currently a pediatric cardiologist on a rotating seat. Notice there is no echocardiography, even though we have a seat at the table in terms of arguing, and the ASE joins me at the table to argue about echo codes. The votes are actually these particular specialties. So if I want to get more money for an echo, I need to argue with pathology and pediatrics and geriatrics and urology and everybody else that some payment is appropriate for a transesophageal echo or an echocardiogram. We base our decisions on numbers, but what comes before us is chosen by CMS, and CMS chooses all new technology codes, bundled codes, what they call overvalued codes, which means any code that has more than $10 million in expenses, or if it grows quickly or is a high volume code. And as I've listed in yellow here, all echo codes are unfortunately in this. So every few years, the echo codes come back up for revisiting in terms of valuation. And those values are determined by a survey, which is sent to people doing the service. So that might be echocardiographers. It is then compared to key reference services, which might be something like an EKG or an ICU visit, but it's mostly based on time. And hence, if somebody says they can do an echo in less time, then you can be assured that there will be pressure to lower the reimbursement for that echo. Here are some things that recently we valued at the RUC. Many of these are all cardiac services. E&M services were the biggest one. E&M, as you know, on January 1st, 2021 went up in value by $5 billion total dollars. It's a huge amount. And that means that everything else in this list goes down a little bit because this is a zero-sum game. So what's my prediction about, well, the future of echo vis-a-vis reimbursement? Well, it's not that easy to predict the future, but having done this for decades, here's what I will tell you. You can anticipate there'll be a 25% reduction in physician pay for interventions in EP, not necessarily for echo. For EKG, likely there will be elimination of EKG professional interpretation because this will be done by a computer, is what Medicare believes. Site neutrality is an issue for echo, and that keeps coming back and likely will be embraced, which means that if you are an echo lab in a hospital, you can anticipate you'll be paid less because currently that service is reimbursed less in an outpatient non-facility setting. There might still be a differential, but it won't be what it is today. And there will be reduced payments for things that can be done over the internet and by telephone. You can be assured that there will be more bundled care, value-based care. These things are in evolution. Unfortunately, they've not yet carried much weight with Medicare because they haven't proven to save a lot of dollars. What does save dollars, though, is to mandate automated EHR clinical decision support and appropriate use. pre-authorization. Echo has been excluded from that, but Medicare keeps revisiting this, and I would predict that there will be some sort of tool in terms of pre-authorization for all echoes. Now, lastly, I mentioned the appropriate use criteria. Currently, advanced imaging does not include echo, but may in the future. You can expect there'll be no rise in the conversion factor at this time. In fact, we've gotten a reprieve this year because of COVID. Normally, the rates go down by about 0.2% per year, and that has been suspended through December 31st. Now, if you run an echo lab in a hospital, there's different. They actually got a raise this year, not a cut. Lastly, you don't want to be considered a low value care. In published studies, Hodgkin's disease annual CT scanning costs $9 million per quality adjusted life year. Nobody's going to pay for that. Look how much trouble cardiology's gotten into trying to prescribe PCSK9 inhibitors or Entresto for heart failure. And these are $35,000 to $150,000 per quality adjusted life year. Echo will be subject to the scrutiny, and we need to show our value that somehow what we do will lead to improvements in quality of life and perhaps longer life as well. And lastly, the existential threats to echo. Artificial intelligence, what happens when machines read things is that the Medicare people believe that they therefore can pay less to either the technician or the echocardiographer interpreting this. And that's because they believe the machine is doing more work, and hence less work is done by the physician. POCUS is a big threat because lower cost providers in POCUS can do some things that mainframe echoes currently do. And POCUS is considered an extension of the history of the physical examination, and hence they may not. And lastly, your employer will vary. Maybe hedge funds will be employing echocardiographies, and I can assure you they have less interest in patient welfare. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Wright. That was a very illuminating discussion of some tremendous amount of issues that we deal with in advocacy all the time. Hopefully we have time to talk about some of these things further in the discussion period. I now want to move to Dr. Susan Mayer. Dr. Mayer went to medical school at Loyola in Chicago, did her residency at Texas Southwestern in Dallas, and then and also her fellowship. And then she was on the faculty at Johns Hopkins for several years in Baltimore, but recently has moved to St. Luke's Cardiovascular Consultants in Kansas City. Susan has done a tremendous amount of work in advocacy for the American Society of Echo in the last several years, and she now is currently the chair of the Advocacy Committee of ASE. So I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Susan Mayer. Susan?
Today I will be discussing the trends in echocardiography. I would like to thank the ASC, Carol Mitchell, and Dr. Rocco for having me on this session. Over the years, the Advocacy Committee has noted that there's been a significant increase in limited echo studies, and this graph illustrates the number of studies from 2010 to 2018. The last time the ASC looked at the evolving trends in the use of echocardiography was in 2007, and this was published by Drs. Perlman, Ryan, Picard, and Douglas. They studied the trends of echocardiography among Medicare beneficiaries between 1999 and 2004. The rate of growth of echo services during this time frame was similar to the rate of growth of medical services in general. The annualized growth rate of 7.7% took into account the increasing number of Medicare beneficiaries, changes in conversion factor, adjustment in Medicare RVUs, and the shift in volume of echo increased by 45% over the study period. Patients with repeat studies in the same year and number of repeated studies per person did not rise. This table illustrates the specialty that requested echocardiography studies, and that was mostly requested by internal medicine at the time, 36% of the claims, and cardiology was 29%, and then general practice 20%. The specialty that most commonly performed echo study was cardiology at 75%, followed by internal medicine for 15%. Because of the rise of limited echo studies, the ASC decided it was time to reassess the trends in volume and spending across a 5-year timeframe between 2015 and 2019. The goals were to assess delivery of echocardiography services and compare the echo services with other cardiac imaging modalities. We submitted an RFP, and the Moran Group was selected to help us with this project. The writing group was selected by the ASC Executive Committee, and the key ASC support members are Irene Butler from our Vice President for Health Policy, and Denise Garris, Principal at the Chorus Group and expert in regulatory affairs. Some of the changes in data outcomes from 2004 is that there's been a significant number of physicians who have moved from private practice to the hospital setting. CPT code 93306 was introduced in 2006. There's been a recent change in identification of physician specialties with EP and interventional cardiology in 2015. There's been a change from ICD-9 to ICD-10 codes, and CMS has modified the data included in the SAF file use, which has led to more granularity in data sets. I would like to share a brief overview of the findings. We are still in the process of analyzing the data. Here are the aggregate trend results of the average annual growth rate of echo and other imaging services between 2015 and 2019, based on the Medicare Physician Supplier Procedure Summary. For 93306 complete echo, the average annualized growth rate was relatively flat at 1% and allowed charges 1%. Limited echo, on the other hand, had an annualized growth rate of 19% with allowed charges of 13%. Other cardiac imaging studies are noted below. The results of the per beneficiary growth analysis data is similar to that of the aggregate trends. The average annual growth rate for complete echo is 1.3% and limited echo 16.2%. The next thing that we looked at was the aggregate trend results for place of service for 93306 or complete echo. 35% of the time they are performed in the office and about 35% in the inpatient hospital setting. A quarter of the studies are in the on-campus outpatient hospital setting. The trend results for place of service for 93308 is that the majority of studies have been performed in the inpatient hospital setting about 55% of the time, followed by on-campus outpatient hospital about 20%, and the rates in the office have been declining from 15 to 12%. The aggregate trend results for billing by specialty for 93306, cardiology is located in the dark blue and bills the majority of complete echo studies, but this has been decreasing from 83% in 2015 to 78% in 2019. Interventional cardiology in gray has increased from 6 to 12%. Internal medicine is in orange and has been decreasing from 7 to 5%. The aggregate trend results for billing for limited echo studies show that cardiology is the major biller for limited echo and is located in dark blue, but has been declining over the years from 76 to 68%, and is followed by interventional cardiology, 11%, and then ED, which is in purple, had about 8% of the studies in 2015 and has increased to 10% in 2019. Here's a table showing the indications for complete echo studies, and they've been relatively constant between 2016 to 2019. The number one indication is non-rheumatic mitral valve insufficiency, followed by shortness of breath and atherosclerotic heart disease of the native coronary artery without angina pectoris. The indications for limited echo during this time frame, the number one indication is pericardial effusion, followed by cardiomegaly and non-rheumatic mitral valve insufficiency, shortness of breath, and non-rheumatic aortic stenosis. A cadence study was done to look at the number of follow-up echo studies performed, a washout period of 6 months before a complete echo study was performed, the index event. Patients were followed for 6 months after the index study to look at follow-up studies. Of the 3.9 million beneficiaries identified as having a complete echo, about 10% had one follow-up complete echo study, and approximately 12.5% had at least one repeat complete echo study within 6 months. SPECT was the most common imaging study conducted following a complete echo in about 16% of the beneficiaries. In contrast, the cadence study that was done looking at the limited echo as an index visit, about 8% had one follow-up visit for a limited echo, and about 11% had at least one follow-up study for a limited echo. In contrast with the complete echo study, the most common cardiac imaging study conducted with a limited echo was a complete echo, and about 30% of patients had received at least one complete echo study. Why are echo studies increasing? There's been a shift in inpatient setting from complete to limited studies to save cost, time, and decrease inpatient length of stays. There's been technological advances in cardiology, and more complex procedures are being performed. Repeat studies are being performed on patients being referred to tertiary centers for complex procedures, and studies are being performed in the ED and critical care settings when patients are acutely ill. In addition, with the recent COVID-19 pandemic, we can expect that there's going to be even more limited echo studies performed to prevent prolonged exposure of our sonographers to potential COVID patients. I would like to thank you for your time and attention today. We hope to have a publication out soon with all of our data. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mayer, for this illuminating information that's you're processing and coming out. Our next speaker is Dr. David Skolnick. Dr. Skolnick is Associate Professor of Medicine at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and he is the director of the Echo Lab at St. Luke's Mid-America Heart Institute in Kansas City. He's done a lot of work in interventional echocardiography and been a leader in the field in that area over the last several years. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Skolnick for his lecture. David?
Good afternoon. My name is David Skolnick, and I've been asked to cover this topic of balancing quality and sustainability in the Echo Lab. This is my disclosure slide. I'd like to take a moment and introduce you to St. Luke's Mid-America Heart Institute, where I've worked for over 20 years. That's the blue dot in the center of Kansas City. St. Luke's has built a healthcare system with several metropolitan hospitals, outpatient clinics, and outreach locations. This year, we anticipate seeing 84,000 outpatients, about half that many inpatients, and that will generate about 36,000 echoes for our group to read. I work with 65 cardiologists and 35 APPs. And here's an example of the programs that rely heavily on our echo services. We've had a transplant program since 1985, and we've been early participants in clinical trials for Watchman, TAVR, and MitraClip. We have challenges here in Kansas City, as I suspect so do you. There is just more to read. Here's an example of the number of clips that we used to think was a complete study. In 2005, a mere 21 clips. That's more than doubled over the last 13 years, and we'll continue to add to this list. There are more to read in the journals in JACC and CIRC and JACE. Our patients are getting older or more complicated. And when you find an example like this of A2 prolapse with a very eccentric jet of mitral regurgitation, we call this severe, but the ASC asks us when there is doubt to be more quantitative in our assessment of regurgitation. And quantification we find to be humbling, challenging, time-consuming, and takes practice. And there's a limited amount of money. And this is the latest annual report for the Medicare Trust Fund. You can see the downward slope, and it doesn't look so good by the year 2026. This is our echo department. We have an echo school that we've had for the last several years. We have 25 FTE sonographers. There are 20 echo physicians within the group that are dedicated to reading echoes. We ask that they take the national exam and pass it every 10 years to remain credentials within St. Luke's Health System to be an echo physician. And within that group of 20, there are 4 who are really particularly dedicated to interventional echo. We typically do TAVRs on Tuesdays, Watchman every other Wednesday, and mitral cases on Thursday. A lot of our energy for quality focuses on education. We have a monthly CME meeting for the physicians. We review articles, new guidelines, interesting, challenging cases to make sure that we're all moving in the same direction in terms of how we interpret and report findings on our echo studies. There's a weekly echo conference for the fellows, and we strongly encourage the sonographers to attend. And as I alluded to earlier, we participate in a number of clinical trials, primarily in structural heart disease. And over time, I think we've become better clinicians and echocardiographers in the space of valvular heart disease. We use a fair amount of contrast to help calculate EF and volumes when it's particularly important. And if you've had a prior echo in our system, we will almost always compare it to the prior to make comments about incremental changes which are important to the clinician. Here are a handful of the quality improvement projects that we've worked over the last several years, I think continue to improve the quality and help us with the workload of patients and studies that we performed every day. For those of you who run an echo lab, you may know about time critical findings. It's a new proposed requirement by the IAC that will likely come in the next year or so. In the old days, we, like probably everyone else, would find a phone number, call Dr. Jones, discuss the findings, and report it in the echo report. A little bit of a time-consuming process. Dr. Michael Main, who's a friend and a colleague and the program director of this meeting, came up with this idea several years ago, and now embedded in our echo reports is this toggle switch of critical findings. And if we find a critical finding and we click yes, that then flows to our electronic medical record, which is Epic. And the next person who opens the chart will get this best practice alert, acknowledging that there is an important echo finding and that they need to acknowledge it before they continue within the chart. In the last year or so, we now have a HIPAA-safe way of texting similar information to the ordering physician or provider. We almost always get a response back saying thank you, and sometimes a phone call to discuss the findings and what we think might be a reasonable next step. We've worked hard to eliminate what we think may be unnecessary studies or unnecessary work. Bethany Austin and my group several years ago presented this study at this meeting. Within Epic, if a previous echo is already stored within our system and another echo is now ordered within the last 6 months, we get a best practice alert reminding the physician or asking the physician or APP, is the study still needed because there is one within the last 6 months? And when this project started, and still today, about 30% of the inpatient echo volume is reduced just by this option. In the early days of Watchman, I think we were very excited to do a lot of TE studies on these Watchman patients. They consume 4 studies per patient, the screening TE, the implant, 45 days and 1 year. And as the program grew, it really became a fair amount of work to take care of all these patients. And we thought it would be more prudent to switch this volume from TE and share that volume with our colleagues in CT angiography. And so typically the pre-screening Watchman and some of the follow-up is now done by CT angiography. We've had an uptick in patients who are getting either referred for echo or TE for suspected endocarditis, perhaps even before the blood cultures came back. We worked with those who order these echoes with our infectious disease colleagues and worked on a more streamlined algorithm so we were all on the same page as to who really needs an echo, and particularly a TE when we're worried about this diagnosis. And although bubbles are certainly not very expensive, all the PFO and ASD closure, all the PFO closure trials really looked at patients under 60, perhaps up to 65. So if your workup is for a stroke and you get an echo and you're over 65, we do not do the bubble study. As I alluded to earlier, we have a very large valve program. And I'd like to use this analogy that if you have a pacemaker, it really behooves us to follow you regularly, as we do, as everyone does in this country, to make sure you don't present to the emergency department with a battery that's at end of life. By same analogy, if you have significant valve disease, we understand this natural history. This is the natural history of a significant valve disease, and we need to figure out where this inflection point is to take care of you. We do not want you to come to our practice, to our hospital at this state. I think this idea was encapsulated in an editorial last year in JACE, the need for echo alerts for aortic stenosis. The time has come. This was last year. We started working on this project probably 2 years ago, maybe even 3 years ago. We've embraced a Valve Center of Excellence model. And within our echo report, since we don't yet have structured reporting with a lot of discrete variable terms that we can use to extract and to follow patients over time, we built something specifically for valve disease. So if you have significant valve disease, you can now toggle on one of these categories. And for example, if you have severe mitral regurgitation, as an inpatient, that diagnosis then flows to the paperwork that you will receive as a patient. So at least now that patient is educated and aware of their diagnosis. There's a recommendation or suggestion that you could be followed up in our valve clinic at 932 Valve. If both as inpatients and outpatients, you think that this echo and the valve lesion would meet an ACC AHA recommendation for when the next echo should be ordered, you click this box. In the impression section, we basically lifted the recommendations right out of the guidelines, though they were updated last year. The guideline recommendations have not changed since 14. And in the absence of symptoms, still with normal LV function, guidelines recommend a repeat echo. 6 to 12 months for severe MR, 1 to 2 years for moderate MR, to help the clinician and perhaps the patient who has access to the reports as to when the next timely echo should be ordered. And I'd like to conclude with this last project that I think has helped us and served us well. Before COVID, we had about a 4 to 6 week backlog for elective studies. COVID came to Kansas City in mid-March, and about a week later, there was a stay-at-home order. And you can see the drop in inpatient and outpatient echoes that were being performed in Kansas City, and certainly at St. Luke's. Well, in this very early phase of COVID, we needed to triage a model, come up with a triage model after we furloughed thousands of studies. How are we going to care for all these patients who subsequently would need echoes? And so we came up with a ranking system of 1 through 4. 1, patients got echoes urgently in a very timely manner, and patients with a score 4 could wait months and perhaps even many months. And this came up with this idea of a focus echo to try and help take care of thousands of patients that we had furloughed for echo studies. And the focus echo works like this, primarily for the outpatient. If you as the clinician have a focus question, we will get you a focused answer. Again, ideally suited for the outpatient. When you follow a single issue, if you're looking for ejection fraction to follow a patient's response to therapy, to time ICDs or CRTs, we'll get you echoes with contrast, get you an EF, and get you a volume. Similarly, if you're following valve disease, either pre-intervention or post-intervention, whether it's aortic or mitral, this is a very focused echo. Not as commonly, but we offer these focus echoes for our aortic dilatations, effusions, and pulmonary hypertension. So thank you for your attention. This is how we try and balance quality and sustainability in our lab in Kansas City at the Mid-America Heart Institute at St. Luke's. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Skolnick, for an excellent lecture and review of all the quality parameters to think about in running an echocardiography laboratory. Before I introduce our last speaker, I'd like to just remind the audience to please use the question and answer tab to ask questions. We will be having a live Q&A at the end of this session. Our next speaker is Ms. Peg Knoll, and she is the semi-retired manager of Cardiovascular Center at the University of California, Irvine Health. She has been an active volunteer at ASE since 1979. She will be speaking to us today on the topic of promotion of sonographers in the Echo Lab and ASE leadership. Thank you. Peg, we'll let you take it over.
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank the committee and the chairs for inviting me to this session. So let's get started. We've only got 10 minutes. The pandemic has changed our entire universe and the way we think and will do everything for the rest of our lives. So BC is going to be what we did before COVID and then during COVID for C, and AC is after COVID. There is no normal, but really, there never was a normal. PTSD is real, and it's not just for the military. You've been under so much trauma while dealing with COVID. So why? You've been working long hours, days without a break, exhaustion, isolation from family and friends, feelings of loneliness, frustration, anger, and feeling betrayed by the system. Fears of bringing COVID home to our families or becoming infected yourselves, and quite frankly, and becoming a statistic. Shortages of PPE, equipment, beds, ventilators, and staff are also worries. Why were sonographers not in the first group when it came to doling out the vaccines at most centers? Policies were changing every second as new information was and is relayed from across the world. More patients dying than ever before and without family except on a video screen. Unlike other disasters, which have largely been concentrated in duration and geography, COVID has been worldwide and long-lasting. Plus, there's not been any additional help from other states or countries to come to the rescue. So beware of the moods of your staff and look for signs of burnout. For the last year and a half, I've been so worried about everyone's mental and physical health, but especially the healthcare and essential workers. Then I saw this article in the LA Times by Dr. Victor Dazia, and it says what we owe frontline healthcare workers. Before COVID, 33 to 50% of healthcare workers experience burnout. This is a threat to the quality healthcare for all of us. So what do we need to do? A full-scale effort to support healthcare and essential workers. National, but really worldwide strategies to help workers recover and to mitigate pre-existing drivers of burnout. Develop a tracking system to monitor their physical and mental health. Luckily, or unfortunately, The National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health established the World Trade Center Health Program to track these things in first responders and survivors of the 9/11 terrorist attack. Data is published annually and has been reauthorized until 2090. Currently, there is funding for short-term monitoring for COVID, but this needs to be done long-term. So in order to motivate and support others, what do we need to have in our traits? We need to aspire to motivate, influence, and encourage. Become the person people want to follow. You do not need to solve everyone's problems, but you do need to recognize the potential in your staff. And you don't have to be perfect. Mistakes are proof that you are growing. And if you're not making any mistakes, you're playing it too safe. Create a culture that allows for mistakes and encourages creativity and exploration. You don't need to know everything. In fact, it's very gratifying for staff when you tell them you don't know everything. You do not need to oversee everything. Micromanaging is not your friend. So it's been very difficult in the last year and a half to be a leader. It's been difficult to be anything in the last year and a half. So remember to admit when you're wrong and apologize to that person and in public. Be a thanking machine. Praise publicly whenever possible and in front of higher-ups and team members, and never take credit for something that others have done. Maintain an eternally and contagiously positive attitude. There will be plenty of negative thoughts and fears floating around. If you go in a bad mood, the whole staff will come in a bad mood. We had a staff member who came to me and was worried about a rumor she had heard. And I told her that the rumor was true. She was upset because it did affect them and I had not discussed it with the staff. So we started rumors and recognition at our monthly staff meetings so that the staff would feel comfortable coming to me or to the meeting to discuss a rumor. And then also we did recognition so staff could recognize each other, or if a patient or family member or leadership recognized someone. Know your culture and personalities. Communicate uniquely with each person. Your attitude leads the way. Lead by example. And don't forget, when someone's hurt, nobody ever yells, "Is there a hospital administrator in the house?" The two biggest traits and most valued traits of a good leader and a human being are empathy and integrity. Staff need to know that their families come first. If your staff know you have their backs, they will bend over backwards for you. Okay, so where do we start? If you hire smart, that's your best thing. My staff used to tell me if I made a bad hire. Let the expectations be known of what's expected, even during the interview process. Extensive training and orientation is well worth the time and will pay off in the end. Quality standards and scanning protocols are important to inform everyone about, and patient safety. Also, advancement opportunities, employee development. Try to anticipate staff's needs. And remember, hire staff that are smarter than you, and your job will be so much easier. Also, if you have deal breakers, behaviors that you will not accept under any circumstances, let them know. For me, it's always been lying. All right, so what do? You recognize, encourage, and cultivate potential in staff. Find out what your organization supports for you to do. Is there educational time off? Is there additional educational courses? How can you work in their needs and wants of your staff? Sometimes you have to kind of work around, like maybe you could use educational time off for staff to go on a medical mission. What are the needs of your staff? I had a staff who was worried about an active shooter coming in the office. I wasn't too worried about that, but she was. So I arranged for assaultive behavior, bullying in the workplace, and active shooter training for the staff with our hospital police. And that training actually did, unfortunately, come in handy when this same employee was attacked by a patient. But I like to think that the training that they had helped make the situation not as bad as it actually could have been. We also do M&Ms for debriefing after weird incidences, where we discuss what we did, what happened, and what we could do better the next time. Encourage attendance at local hospital seminars and training. I always encouraged our MA staff to attend lectures on echo and stress and CAS so that they would know what they were ordering for their patients. Encourage staff to present journal clubs, interesting case studies, and local meetings and national meetings. Recognize who are your stars and who are your worker bees. Staff do not leave a job, they leave due to poor management. And remember, we are the sum of our experiences and expertise. So what staff qualities make a good leader? You need to show you're a leader. Rise up to each situation. Don't be that sonographer that says no. Learn more about your company and our professional organizations. Learn how your position affects other positions. We don't work alone. Everything we do affects the entire organization. Try to achieve higher personal career goals and gains. Strengthen your knowledge and skills and improve productivity. Ben Franklin once said, "Tell me and I forget, teach me and I may remember, involve me and I learn." We are never too old or too young to be or to have a mentor. Mentors provide information and knowledge. They can identify areas we need to improve on. They stimulate personal and professional growth and offer encouragement. In conclusion, this isn't rocket science. What it is like trying to do a good job of getting all your pre-cath or pre-interventional information from your echo before that patient goes in. So we need to do a good job when we're hiring and cultivating our staff. Be a good person. Compassion, creative, critical thinking, common sense, which is a gift from God, and she wasn't very generous all the time with that. Be a caretaker, and because we're caretakers, we tend to be codependent. Who are the commanders, the chiefs, and the worker bees? During COVID, how did staff react to difficult and unique situations and people? Who initiates putting out the fires and not starting them? You definitely don't need people starting fires. Can people think outside the box? Are they able to embrace and initiate change? Multitasking, are they able to prioritize situations and people? And a sense of humor never hurts. So I want to look at this graph that my friends, my ACE family had helped me develop about some of the staff benefits that are offered at different organizations. I want to thank all of those that helped me with this. So I want to thank you for your attention and for fighting the good fight. This is your World War II. And remember, you are the next greatest generation of healthcare workers. Also, somewhere there is a patient who holds you in their memory forever because you were kind to them. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Peg. That was a great talk about leadership and all the issues we've all dealt with in the last year. So now we're going to move to our question and answer session. And the first question that came in, I think, is a great one. It talks about charging schemes and handheld and focused echocardiograms. So I'm going to ask Dr. Wright to comment on that first, and then ask Dr. Mayer to follow up. Dr. Wright?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I apologize, my camera broke right now, so I'll just have to do this by audio. But this to us is an existential issue. I will tell you that the way the payers look at it, if you have a lower cost provider who comes by and says, listen, I can get all the information you need or 90% of the information you need using my iPhone on a probe, and I can do it in 5 minutes, then they're going to pay 5 minutes worth of time for an echo. So POCUS and handheld devices in general are huge threats to those of us who run what I'll call mainframe echo machines. Because of this impetus to lower the reimbursement to whatever the lowest cost is. And when people tell me they can get all the information they need using a simple little handheld device, and of course, the edified audience knows that is not true. The problem is, what's the defensive posture about that? So there have been various strategies employed. One is to develop a separate set of codes, potentially, for handheld devices. Another would be to incorporate POCUS as just part of the physical exam. That's what Medicare would actually prefer. I mean, what they've told me is that, listen, I don't pay a cardiologist to use a stethoscope, so why should I pay a cardiologist to use a handheld POCUS type device? The third would be to bundle more things into an echo so that you couldn't bill a 93306, for example, without also doing speckle strain rate imaging or continued advancements such that handheld devices won't have the computing power to do that. And I would encourage you to talk to the advocacy people at ASE and ACC and some of the people who are in the know about this if you have concerns about it, because it is a hot topic that we discuss all the time right now, and it will come to fruition in the next 12 to 24 months.
Great. Susan.
Dr. Wright, I agree with you. This is a very hot topic. And, another thing to keep in mind is that if people are using POCUS Echo, you really need to save your images. A report has to be generated, and there should be a quality assurance program. And so, you could do an exam by POCUS, but you have to keep in mind all these extra features. Another thing too is the question about doing POCUS for lung exam. We're not really incorporating the POCUS lung exam into our echo labs really at the present time. And we're struggling with this. This has been reviewed for part of the physical exam, even for the ER folks as well.
Okay, great. Let's go over to Dr. Skolnick, and you may want to comment on this too. I was particularly interested, David, in your comments about the focused exam and trying to move a lot of patients through that are backlogged. We have exactly the same problem that you do here at Wisconsin. And also, please, if you want to comment on the actual direct question that was asked about referral and repeating exams. So, David, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I think, we have a problem that everyone has. There are too many patients who need echoes, and there's not enough bandwidth in our echo lab. You hire 5 more sonographers, and you're still two behind. The pandemic of COVID really forced the issue as all these patients got furloughed, if you will, from the echo lab when all hospitals really became shut down except for the most urgent and emergent patients, and how we're going to care for patients who needed timely echo studies to advance their care, which is how we came up with the focus echo as I outlined. So it served us well. I think it's still difficult for the ordering clinician to be honest as to, are they getting a complete echo? What's a limited echo? I mean, what is a limited echo? And so we try to come up with these 6 defined focus echoes, and there's a lot of mechanics, a lot of education to make it work. I'm sorry, there was a part 2 to your question. I already forgot. Oh yeah. Someone had asked do we repeat echoes if someone's referred in for a TEE? If the first echo at St. Luke's is a TEE because they got an echo somewhere else, would we repeat the echo? We try not to. We try not to repeat studies. We invest a fair amount of time, unfortunately, in reviewing the outside echo, gratis, if you will. We have a fairly good web-based way of pulling down outside images. If they're referred in, let's say for mitral edge-to-edge repair, tricuspid studies, as we're now getting involved in, we will look at the baseline echo and then proceed with the T. We try not to repeat it, just to repeat it. And I'll tell you one last thing, if I may hop in about the POCUS study. 2 years ago at the ASC, they had a whole session on POCUS. And I thought, oh, great, we're going to bring POCUS back to St. Luke's. It is really hard to bring POCUS into our echo lab. It was hard to figure out who's going to do the POCUS study. The sonographer, me, you, maybe Susan. We haven't quite figured out how to do that yet.
Yeah, our greatest success has been when I got handheld devices for our fellows. They use it all the time in the CCU and on call, and it's become very effective as part of our training program. But you're right, when you try to get faculty to start doing it, it's a much more of an uphill battle. Great. Carol.
Yes, so we have a question now for Dr. Merri Bremer. And Merri, in your lecture, you had mentioned about continuous accreditation. Can you explain a little more about how that would work and why it is advantageous?
I would be happy to. Thank you, Carol. This is something that IAC is currently working on, and it's in combination with a couple of questions that were raised. The first is, do we really have to have, as I mentioned, labs scrambling like mad every 3 years just to get accreditation done? So is there a way that we can make it, instead of once every 3 years, you do something year 1, something year 2, and then perhaps the case submissions year 3? So that was a component of it, was to spread the work out so that it would not be such an all-consuming thing. The other piece that we're talking about right now is for labs who have been accredited for 20 years, who have never been delayed. Do they need the same level of scrutiny as labs who have clearly demonstrated challenges with coming up to the accreditation standards? So those are the two things that the QI committee for IAC is looking at right now. The other piece of it is that we have developed a new virtual application. It's a universal application, and it will allow labs to store policies so that they don't have to re-upload them every 3 years. So perhaps in year one, after you've been accredited, then you will make sure that your staff is all up to date, and you update policies whenever it works, whenever you change policies. So the goal is to make it less work in that third year or whatever year, and make this less time consuming for labs.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Merri.
I think we're running just about out of time here. I just wanted to ask one more question of Dr. Wright. You alluded to the issue with AI and the payers thinking about this would be a deja vu, going back to not paying for electrocardiogram interpretations. I want to just make a couple comments on how those discussions are going on in the RUC with regard to AI.
Yeah, and this is a constant battle. And I'll tell you what happens is you sit around the RUC and you're arguing, saying that it takes so many minutes to read an echo. And then one of the jurors, if you will get online and they'll go somewhere that will say, usually a vendor who's saying, buy our program and you can read an echo in 2 minutes because now the computer will do all the reading for you. And then they bring that up and they said, listen, I've just read on the internet that a computer can read an echo, so why should I reimburse you 14 minutes or whatever the amount of allocated time is to read an echo? And that happens particularly, honestly, in the interventional space where somebody will publish an article saying, I can do a Watchman in 14 minutes, and all of a sudden Watchmans are reimbursed for 14 minutes. So we have to be very careful about the slippery slope that bragging that AI can replace you as an echo interpreter, because I don't think that's in our lifetime going to happen. It'll be an enabler, but it won't be a replacement. And that's our defense, but it's a hard argument, frankly.
Great, thank you very much. I think we're totally out of time now. And so I'm going to ask Carol to close us out here.
Well, I just want to say thank you, everyone, for attending our session. It's been a great scientific session. If you have additional questions, please feel free to contact ASE, and we'll be happy to follow up with you and get you answers. Thanks again for attending.
Thank you, everyone.